Yes, Mr. Belash, Secretary Zinke has frequently spoken of restoring trust between the BLM and those who use federal lands and those who live near those lands. Coming from a state that's roughly 42% federally owned, only about 18% of Arizona is privately owned. I understand that the actions of BLM have significant impacts on the economies in rural Arizona. I often hear from constituents about issues such as BLM mismanagement of wild burros, problems with access to federal lands, and slow permit processing times. What opportunities do you see for the Bureau to improve engagement with local stakeholders in actions such as developing land management plans and cooperatively managing these critical resources in Arizona?
Thank you, Senator Flake. As a former adjacent landowner and manager in my home state, I got to experience firsthand various planning processes and NEPA reviews with BLM and other federal agencies. And I would say that more than anything, I hope to instill as a Westerner the perspective of being not just a good neighbor, but a quality neighbor in the western part of our nation. These reviews and processes conducted with cooperating agency recognition of these other governments needs to be more than just a paper exercise. There needs to be real consideration given to the comments that come in from those state, local, and tribal governments that we will work with in these processes.
All right. Thank you. Regarding BLM permit processing, Arizona has a long history, as you know, of responsible mining that has taken place on BLM, Forest Service, and private lands. Because of the prevalence of BLM lands throughout the state, many mines on private lands need BLM permits for access or related land disturbance activities. And it's shocking to hear stories about the length of time it takes to get the most straightforward mining permit in Arizona. For example, there's a proposed gold mine near Quartzsite that they've been trying to get up and going for years. It's a very small, simple mine using no toxic chemicals on a few acres far away from the nearest settlement. It took them several years just to get their BLM permits on what can only be described as a very haphazard process. We can't afford to have land management agencies be so slow to work with those who want to pursue much needed economic activity on these public lands. I hope that your experience at the Alaska Department of Natural Resources, that you can bring to bear those experiences on this agency. And do you think that you can speed up the permit time?
Well, thank you, Senator Flake. I believe that the overall management approach needs to reflect the fact that these lands belong to the public, not necessarily to the agencies that manage them. And with that change in perspective or attitude, we can be timely, efficient, and certain in the administration of permit applications and adjudications.
Right. Well, thank you. Mr. Nelson, your position on BYU football ought to be enough to secure your nomination, I'm sure, but be that as it may, one area that we want to talk about is cooperation between Arizona and the department on tribal water rights settlements. Just this morning, I reintroduced the Hualapai Tribe's Comprehensive Water Rights Settlement Act. We have several settlements that are in need of legislative action this year. Some are in the negotiation phase, others are being implemented. Can you explain how your previous experience at DOJ will help guide you as you work with us on these water rights settlements?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. When I was at the Department of Justice, I had the opportunity to work with Michael Bogert, who was a counselor to Secretary Kempthorne, and he was heavily involved on these Indian water rights settlements, and they are complicated, to say the least. You have a situation where there's sometimes more claims on the water than there is water, and the tribes, their rights often predate many of the other water rights that exist and may be being used. So everyone needs to come to the table, and what I found and what I saw was that the settlement discussions were much more beneficial than years of protracted litigation that ultimately, in many cases, didn't actually work to any good. And so there are guidelines on how to settle those, and I would intend to follow those and help expeditiously push those forward.
Right. Thank you.